Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 2021 documentary film Boris Karloff, The Man Behind the Monster. It's a Shudder exclusive and it's coming to Shudder on Thursday, January 27th. So for that reason, this is a no spoiler review and just also because it's a newer film. So you can look forward to this. But since there are no spoilers, that doesn't mean that if you've already seen it, that this review won't cover anything for you. It will. So you can watch it either way, if you have seen it or if you haven't seen it. But I will say, I will recommend this. This is fun. I did enjoy the documentary. It feels like there's a lot of love for Boris Karloff oozing from this documentary, which makes sense. I mean, I feel like documentaries specifically about people and who they were as people and their careers and their, where they came from, those should feel that way. And this definitely feels that way. And I think one of the big reasons it feels that way is because they worked with Sarah Karloff, which is Boris Karloff's daughter, and she is a delight, I will say that much. She does get interviewed here and there throughout it, and just to hear from her is really cool because she obviously is very thankful for the fans who have been there for her father while he was alive and since he passed. And it really helps to kind of show all the love in this documentary, and that's what I like most about the film. This is directed by Thomas Hamilton, who also directed documentaries Leslie Howard, A Quite Remarkable Life, and Leslie Howard, The Mystery of Flight 777. So very heavy on the Leslie Howard, who I don't even know who they are. Someone can educate me in the comments if you feel like you want to. Written by Hamilton as well as Ron MacCloskey, who wrote the script for Karloff and me. And like I said, to reiterate, Shudder exclusive coming on Thursday, January 27th. So it doesn't really need a synopsis. It's a documentary about the life and times of Boris Karloff for the most part. Now, it's not just one of those documentaries that's just kind of like, this is where he came from, and then he was in this film, and then he was in this film, and then he was in this film. There's so much more to it. It goes into who he was as a person. It has other people talk about who he was as a person. Some interesting little anecdotes that kind of give you more insight into his character on screen and off screen, the things that were going on in his life during the filming of certain films, the issues that were going on with films at the time, not necessarily tied to him, but having to do with, how the world was at that point or how the studios were acting at that point. And yeah, it's very enlightening for that reason, and I enjoy it. There are plenty of film clips and photos that get incorporated into this, so it keeps moving for that reason. It's about, I think with credits, it's an hour and 38 minutes, so it's not super long, but even though it's an hour and 38 minutes, it feels like it goes like that, because the content is very interesting. You're very engaged in the story, their overall story they're telling, but also the smaller stories that get told by all the people being interviewed. And yeah, it's just very interesting and fun. I don't know, sometimes when I'm watching documentaries like this, I don't know if it's just that I get wrapped up in them so much just because I love documentaries, or this is like a wider appeal. So people can also let me know that in the comments. Is this just me? Is it just I'm too nerdy for documentaries? Is that what's going on here? But I like this stuff. I will say the opening credits are kind of messy. There are times where they have the actual words that are to the side of these drawings. And this was kind of a cool aspect of the opening credits, is they have all these drawings of Boris Karloff in different roles. And I like that. And so sometimes they'll be on one side of the screen, sometimes on the other, and sometimes in the middle. So when they're on the sides, like the text is put to the other side so it's not overlapping the art, which is good. But then there are ones where it's like smack dab in the middle and you can't see the art then because the words are over top of it. So it feels odd for that reason, and it feels like they needed to they should have made sure that you're always seeing the artwork, especially if they started it that way. And it seems messy, like they had a hard time figuring out what they wanted to do there. Documentaries, it's one of those days, people. Documentaries usually start with the beginnings of a person, but this actually kind of is talking a little bit about towards the end of his career initially. So early on from the get-go, it feels disorganized. It feels like they had a hard time trying to figure out how to start this documentary. It really does. I will say They do eventually get into a rhythm and you kind of forget about how it started initially. So that is good. But early on, it feels like a disorganized mess. It really does. And honestly, when I was watching it, I'm like, where they're starting this, it legit feels like you just turned on a documentary that was on TV and it's like halfway through. Because it's nice to kind of get the beginnings first and like understand the base person and then start talking about the progression of their life and their craft and all that type of stuff. And they don't do that here. Eventually you get that information about, you know, the beginnings of Karloff's life and getting into film and, you know, his craft and how he felt about everything. But initially they just start talking about some films like right off the bat, like you know him already. So it was a weird choice. I don't think it was a good choice. And like I said, it just makes it feel initially like it's a disorganized mess. So I did have a problem with that. But like I said, thankfully, it does then eventually feel like things kind of straighten out and it gets an actual rhythm to it. And then it feels organized eventually. I'd say it probably takes about the first 15, 20 minutes or so to really get in its groove. And then it's really good. Some of the framing of people being interviewed is off. They don't frame everyone necessarily the exact same way, and I don't expect that in documentaries. Like, different situations will dictate that you have to kind of shoot people differently. But there are some that they frame where, like, they're so close on the person's face that when it comes up, like, you instinctively, like, move your head back because you're just like, whoa, you're in my personal space. So I think that's another problem with the documentary. Granted, it's a relatively small problem. And just like with the disorganization situation, it kind of gets better as the film goes on. So part of it feels like there was a little bit of learning going on as the documentary happened, but then it just gets really good. They get legitimate experts to talk, which makes this very educational. It's not one of those documentaries like, I know I talk about this all the time, the documentary Room 237, which it was a horrible documentary in my opinion because it just had people talking and they never identify who the people are talking, and it just seems like it's these people with these harebrained ideas. With this documentary, as you should do, especially if you're documenting someone's life in this situation, they have title cards for every person saying who they are, giving what their expertise is, and they have like film historians. They have people who have worked in the industry. They have people who knew Boris Karloff. And it helps to build this very rich, very in-depth, awesome story about who he was in his career. And it works greatly, and it feels very educational. My nerd hat, like my horror nerd hat, went on pretty quickly with this documentary, and I really like that. My favorite part of this was a deep dive into the behind the scenes of the very first Universal Frankenstein film. This is one of the things that they do. With some of the films, they'll kind of go into the background on what was going on the set. Not necessarily having to do with Karloff, but it's interesting to just know that, because especially with a role like Universal Frankenstein, it was obviously very important in Karloff's life and very iconic as far as he's concerned. Well, he made it iconic. It's cool to know like the challenges that not only he was facing at that point, but that the people making the film were facing at that point. And it really sends your brain down this rabbit hole of like, what if, what if, what if? You know, the film turned out to be what the film is today. But when you're hearing all these challenges and all these things that were going on during the set, it just makes you start thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder what the film would have been like if they had chosen to go this direction, or if they had chosen to not include this or include this. It's very interesting for that reason, and that's why that's my favorite part of the film. Especially because the Universal Frankenstein film, the first one, is so iconic and so important as far as horror goes. There are some recordings of Karloff interviews that they actually got a hold of, which I think is great. It's always wonderful when you can actually get the voice of the actual person you're talking about, and there's not a lot that they play from it, but it's enough that like you start to feel him in the documentary for that reason. And it just gives it this kind of even more loving feeling like I was talking about earlier. So I love that they were able to do that. The information about Karloff himself and his career is extremely fascinating. Yes, like I said, I put my, my horror documentary nerd hat on for this one. It's very engaging, the material, and I honestly felt like it could have been longer. really. It where they ended it was good. I'm not saying that it felt like they had to go longer. I'm saying for me personally, I was like, I'm enjoying this so much, give me more. So that's a good thing. That's a great thing. Who knows? Maybe they could do another one. I don't know. There's great context given for what was happening in the world and with studios when these films were made. That's one of the other things. It's not just about Karloff. It's about Karloff and the world he was living in at the time that he was making films, and just in general, the time that he was alive. So you get a lot of like, this is what was going on in society around him, and this is what became, a challenge for him because of what was going on in the world, or because of his relationship with studios or directors or whatever. So it's not just about solely him. It's about people and things that also influenced who he was and what his career ended up being. Through many stories, they give you the idea of how terrible studios were to work with back then, giving you the idea that as much as film studios are all about money today, they were all about money back then. At no point really, I mean, at least this documentary makes it seem that at no point really did studios care about art. It was really just like the dollar. It's just like, we know how to make money with this, and we don't care about artistry or anything like that, or that they're like living, breathing, feeling people making these things. We just want cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of depressing, but we know this, and it's just interesting to know that this has been going on for so long. The ending is perfect. I will say that. I'm not going to say what the ending is, but it is an interview piece. And that's how they go then to the credits. And I think for the film and for the feel of the film and the content of the film, it was a perfect way to end it. And it'll give you a little bit of the feels too. So, I mean, if you're open to that, which, if you've watched enough of my reviews, I am open to the feels. I am open to getting emotional. So, it didn't make me super emotional, but, just gave me a little bit of the feels. And I'm down with that. Some of the big names interviewed in this one, Guillermo del Toro, which, by the way, I could just listen to him talk all day about horror. Like, his love of horror just oozes in everything he says with stuff like this. And he's just so fascinating to listen to, especially because the way he draws parallels between horror and like his experience with horror and his life with horror is just very interesting and unique. I love it. Also, Sarah Karloff, who I already talked about, Boris Karloff's daughter. Joe Dante, another person who's so nerdy about horror and I could listen to talk all day long. And honestly, it would be amazing if like Joe Dante and Guillermo del Toro would team up for a podcast and just talk to each other about horror. Just both be nerdy about horror. I guarantee you couldn't shut those two guys up if they were just in a room talking about horror together. Because it's so obvious how much they love the genre, and it's fascinating to listen to them. Also in there, John Landis. He's not in there a ton. Dick Miller, Roger Corman, Ron Perlman, and a small portion by Christopher Plummer. And the last thing I want to say is this documentary gave me a lot of films to add to my list to watch. So thanks a lot. My list is already too long, but there's some really cool looking films in there that I either wasn't aware of or wasn't really thinking about recently that like I knew about. And then I was like, oh, I totally forgot about that film. So watching this, honestly, it makes me want to jump into, you can't see it here, but it's in this stack further down. It makes me really want to just start diving into all those Universal films. Because I have that Blu-ray box set of all the Universal monster films. Yeah, so I think it's smart that they're dropping this, and then in February, they're going to be putting together a Boris Karloff collection section on Shudder. So after you watch this documentary, it'd be perfect to just go right to that collection and just start binging Karloff. It'll make you want to do that. So I enjoyed this documentary. Out of 5 stars with half stars possible, I'm giving it a very solid 4-star rating. I do definitely highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. And I would like to see more documentaries from these individuals who did put this one together. So would love to hear everyone else's thoughts on this. Go ahead and put it down in the comments. Also, if you just want to talk about Boris Karloff in general, like your feelings on him, maybe your first film you ever watched with Karloff and how that impacted you. That would be kind of cool to hear about. So go ahead and do that. Also, do me a quick favor. I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe if you're not already subscribed. A lot of my views come from people who are not subscribed, so it would be great if people would subscribe because A, it's quick. B, it is painless. C, costs you no money. So why not do it? It takes you literally a second, and it would make me very happy because when I'm doing this right now, I'm not making any sort of money or anything. I'm just doing this as a creative outlet and a way to build nerdy horror community here because where I live, I can't really talk on a nerdy level about horror with people. The majority of people I can talk any sort of horror with, other than my best friend Rich, is just about like blockbuster films. Like the big names that are so easily recalled by people who haven't even seen horror much. So yeah, but join my community. Help me out here. I would love that. So hit subscribe. Also hit the notification bell button because then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos. And I'm doing about 4 a week, so it's a pretty good amount. So if you could watch them relatively soon after they go up, that would help me gain some traction with views and everything. And I would appreciate that. But regardless, I really do appreciate you taking your time to watch this video. And until next time, keep it brutal.